Welcome to our deep dive on asteroid mining. We're going to be exploring how private companies are taking the lead in this whole new frontier. And we're using a chapter from Emerging Private Sector Technologies in Asteroid Mining to guide our deep dive today.
Such a fascinating area.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, like, just how many private companies are already involved.
It really shows, the entrepreneurial spirit and the belief that space resources are within our reach. Like, it's not a question of if anymore, it's when.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just a bunch of dreamers either. This book outlines 4 key technological areas that companies are focusing on. So it's not just some pie-in-the-sky idea.
Right. It's a very systematic approach.
Yeah, like a multi-pronged attack on this massive challenge. So first up, autonomous spacecraft for resource prospecting. That's
So
pretty cool, just to say.
it rolls right off the tongue.
It does, but like, think about it. AI-driven spacecraft scouting asteroids millions of miles away, all on their own.
It's happening right now. Like, not in the future, but now value. Companies like Planetary Resources, they've got their Arcid series, and Spacebit, they're working on lunar rovers. These are actual robots out there doing this stuff.
It's kind of mind-boggling when you think about the challenges, right? Like, operating these robots so far away, it's not exactly like you can just steer them with a joystick or something.
No, definitely not. You need a high level of autonomy for these spacecraft. They have to be able to make decisions on their own, navigate through these crazy gravitational fields, identify which asteroids are likely to have the resources we need, and they even have to deal with unexpected stuff. Space is a pretty unpredictable place.
Yeah, you're telling me. So this AI and robotics, it's got to be pretty advanced.
Oh, absolutely. Cutting edge.
But okay, so let's say we found some promising asteroids. That's just the first step, right?
Yeah,
Then there's the challenge of actually using those resources.
right. And that's where ISRU comes in situ resource utilization.
Ah, ISRU, catchy.
Super catchy, but also really, really important, because imagine trying to haul everything you need from Earth to an asteroid millions of miles away,
Yeah, that doesn't sound very efficient.
or cheap. The cost would be, well, astronomical. So ISRU is all about using what's already there on the asteroid.
It's got to be. I read that Deep Space Industries, they're working on extracting water from asteroid ice,
Yeah, and they're not the only ones. There's a bunch of companies pursuing that.
turning space ice into rocket fuel
Yeah.
and, like, drinking water.
Sounds crazy, right? But it's totally possible. And it's not just tea water either. We've got companies like Made in Space, and they're developing these 3D printers that can operate in zero gravity. So they can actually use asteroid materials to create tools, build habitats, maybe even make replacement parts for spacecraft.
So they're literally creating, like, a self-sustaining ecosystem in space.
Yeah.
Using resources found on asteroids. It's amazing. But okay, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we got to figure out how to actually get to these asteroids in the first place.
Right.
And it's not exactly a quick trip to the corner shore.
You're talking about propulsion systems. And that's where things get really exciting. The book talks about solar electric propulsion, nuclear thermal propulsion. And there's even this totally wild concept of beamed energy propulsion.
Beamed energy propulsion. Now that sounds straight out of Star Trek, like some kind of transporter beam.
Not exactly, but it's close. Think about it. A powerful laser, or maybe a microwave beam transmitted from Earth, and it provides continuous thrust to a spacecraft that has this special sail. Companies like Momentus Space, they're looking into using this tech to move payloads around the solar system.
Wow. It's really hard to wrap your head around sometimes. But for now, let's stick with the slightly more down-to-earth propulsion systems, like solar electric propulsion. That seems promising.
It is very efficient. The only problem is it's kind of slow.
Slow and steady wins the race.
Maybe. But then you've got nuclear thermal propulsion, which is like the hair, super powerful and fast. But there are definitely safety concerns with that, obviously.
Right, of course. So which one is going to win out in the long run?
It's tough to say. Really depends on what the specific mission is, what kind of asteroid you're targeting, and how quickly you need to get there. Some companies, like Ad Astra, they're developing these advanced plasma rockets. And those could potentially hit that sweet spot between efficiency and D thrust. So we'll see.
A lot of options on the table. Okay, so let's say we found a resource-rich asteroid and we figured out our propulsion system. Now comes the actual mining part. How do you even begin to extract materials from a giant rock floating in space? I mean, it's not like they can just land a bulldozer up there.
Nope, no bulldozers. But this is where it gets really cool. Companies are developing specialized equipment and some super innovative techniques for doing all of this, anchoring to an asteroid, drilling, extracting materials, and all in a low-gravity vacuum environment.
I bet the traditional mining methods that we use here on Earth, I bet those wouldn't work too well up there.
Not at all. Like,
Excellent.
you can't just drill into an asteroid like you would on Earth, no gravity to hold things down, and all the dust you create would just float around and cause problems. Got to rethink the whole process.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what are some of the solutions they're working on?
Well, one approach is using tethers and grappling systems to anchor the mining equipment to the asteroid. It's almost like those rock climbers, securing themselves to a cliff face before they start climbing.
That's a great analogy. And once they're anchored, how do they actually get the materials OUT of the asteroid?
Well, some companies are developing these really cool drills that are specifically designed for low gravity environments, so they minimize any disturbances to the asteroid structure. Other companies are exploring using heat or chemicals to loosen up and extract the materials they want.
Right. And didn't TransAstra develop that thing called optical mining, where they use concentrated sunlight? It's kind of blowing my mind.
Oh, yeah. Optical mining is fascinating. They're essentially using these giant mirrors to focus sunlight onto the asteroid. That creates this intense heat that vaporizes the surface and releases all these valuable gases and minerals. It's like they're harnessing the power of the sun for mining.
So they're basically mining asteroids with sunlight.
Pretty much. But the trick is, what do you do with those vaporized materials? You don't want them just floating off into space.
That'll be a bummer.
So they've come up with these techniques to capture and collect the vaporized stuff using special chambers or collectors, kind of like giant vacuum cleaners.
It's like they're mining the asteroid, and then they just vacuum up all the good stuff.
Exactly. And this is where those 3D printers we talked about earlier come into play. Those printers are crucial for processing the materials. So they can use those extracted materials to create components and tools, even whole structures right there on the asteroid.
So they're like a self-sustaining space factory. They mine the asteroid, process the materials, and then use them to build new things all in one place.
Amazing.
Yeah.
But, okay, gotta ask. What about the environmental impact of all this?
That's a big one, right? You can't just go around strip mining asteroids without considering the consequences.
Agree. A lot of these companies are really focused on this, though. They're developing these mining techniques that minimize disruption to the asteroid's natural environment, and they're looking into ways to responsibly manage any waste products.
It's great that they're being proactive.
Absolutely. They're thinking long term, not just about profits, but about making this whole thing sustainable. But there's another important thing to consider, the legal and ethical side of all of this.
Oh yeah, like who actually owns the resources on an asteroid? And what are the rules when you're operating millions of miles from Earth?
Well, that's kind of tricky right now. The existing international treaties that deal with space, they were written way before asteroid mining was even a thing.
So we need some new space laws, basically.
We do. There are already people working on updating those treaties to make things clearer, trying to establish some rules for space resource utilization, dealing with ownership, liability, how to protect the environment, and just generally making sure that mining is done responsibly.
It sounds like this is just the beginning of a whole new chapter in space exploration.
Oh, for sure. There's a lot to figure out, both on the technical side, A&D, the legal and ethical side. But it's super exciting. We're literally watching a brand new industry being born, one that could completely change how we think about space and unlock incredible opportunities.
It's definitely a journey, and it's just getting started.
Buckle up. That question really gets to the core of it all, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about how to do asteroid mining, but like the bigger question is WHY. Why are we even doing this?
Exactly. It's easy to get lost in all the cool tech and the how-to stuff. But we got to step back and think about what it all means for us, for humanity. Like if we actually become this spacefaring, asteroid mining civilization, what kind of future are we building?
Well, on the one hand, the potential is huge GE. Like we're talking almost unlimited resources, water, metals, all kinds of minerals, probably stuff we haven't even discovered yet.
It's mind-blowing when you really think about it.
Yeah.
We could totally change how we produce energy, create brand new materials, build gigantic structures in space. It's like a whole new era for humanity.
And it's not just about what we can do OUT there in space either. Think about the impact on Earth. If we can mine asteroids for resources, we don't have to rely so much on mining here on Earth.
Yeah, that would be a huge win for the environment.
Absolutely. We could protect ecosystems, maybe even solve some of our resource scarcity issues.
It's like a giant leap forward for sustainability.
And, of course, there's the whole thing about expanding humanity's reach beyond Earth.
Right, that's the big dream, isn't it?
Asteroid mining could be how we get there. Building outposts, research stations, maybe even colonizing other planets. It sounds like science fiction, but it's becoming more realistic every day.
It's exciting, but I gotta be honest, there's a part of me that's a little nervous about all this. Like, are we getting ahead of ourselves? What about the risks? What could go wrong?
It's smart to be cautious. Like any powerful technology, there's potential for good and bad. And one of the biggest concerns with asteroid mining is conflict.
Conflict. Like space wars, fighting over who gets to mine which asteroid.
It might sound like a movie plot, but it's a real possibility. If we don't figure out some clear international rules and agreements for all this, it could turn into a cosmic gold rush.
And nobody wants that.
No. Disputes, tension, maybe even actual conflict. Nobody wins in that scenario.
So we need to figure out the legal stuff, the ethical stuff, before things get out of control.
Definitely. Got to learn from our mistakes here on Earth, We don't want to repeat those in space. And there's another thing to consider, too. The environmental impact.
Right. Even in space, we got to be responsible.
Exactly. Our actions have consequences.
So no blowing up asteroids just for fun.
No blowing up asteroids. We got to be careful, make sure we're not messing up the balance of the solar system. Think about future generations.
It's a big responsibility. We're talking about the whole cosmos, not just Earth.
It really makes you think. And it's not just about the environment either. There are social and economic impacts to consider. Like, what happens to the mining industry here on Earth? What about all the people who work in those jobs? Are they going to be replaced by robots in space?
That's a really important point. We can't forget about the people who could be affected by all this.
We need to start talking about these things now, before it's too late. How do we make sure everyone benefits from asteroid mining? How do we make sure everyone has a chance to be a part of this new era?
It seems like this whole asteroid mining thing, it could change a lot. Not just technology, but like how we see ourselves, our place in the universe, how we treat each other.
It's a challenge, for sure. But it's also a huge opportunity. We have a chance to do things differently, to learn from the past and create a future where space exploration actually makes the world a better place for everyone.
Okay, listener, get ready. Because in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to shift gears a bit. We're going to get into the specifics of how these companies are actually turning this asteroid mining dream into a reality.
We're going to get down into the nitty-gritty. Look at the strategies they're using, the innovations they're developing, and the challenges they're facing.
It's time to see how they're making it happen. Okay, so we're back, and we're ready to get into the nitty-gritty of how these companies are tackling the actual challenges of asteroid mining. We've talked about the big picture, the vision, but now let's get down to the nuts and bolts.
This is where the rubber meets the cosmic road.
Exactly. So let's start with the cost barrier. Launching anything into space is expensive. How are these companies making asteroid mining actually financially feasible?
Well, one of the key strategies is miniaturization. Basically, they're designing everything to be smaller, lighter, more compact, which means you need less fuel to launch it.
Makes sense. Like packing light for a trip.
Yeah.
Where the less you bring, the less it costs.
Exactly. But it's not just about shrinking things down. They're also using modular design.
Modular design, like those prefab houses.
Kinda. Instead of launching one massive spacecraft, they're building things in modules that can be assembled in space.
Oh, I see. So like space Legos.
Exactly. You send up these building blocks and then you put them together out there.
That's super clever. And way more efficient, I bet.
Oh, yeah. And it gives you a lot more flexibility, too. You can customize the mining operation depending on the asteroid you're working on.
And let's not forget the game changer. Reusable rockets. I mean, that's a huge part of this whole thing, right?
Absolutely. Reusable rockets are bringing down the cost of space travel dramatically. It's a total game changer. Thanks to companies like SpaceX, it's not just giant corporations that can afford to go to space anymore.
So we've got our miniaturized modular equipment launched into space on reusable rockets. Now the question is, how do they actually mine the asteroid? It's not like they can just land a bulldozer up there.
Nope, no bulldozers in space. But they are developing some seriously ingenious ways to anchor to an asteroid, drill into it, and get those materials out.
I can only imagine what it takes to engineer that kind of stuff. And they're doing all of this in a low-gravity vacuum environment.
You got it. And the traditional mining methods we use on Earth, yeah, those just wouldn't cut it.
So what are they doing instead? What's the secret sauce?
Well, one approach is using tethers and grappling systems to anchor the equipment to the asteroid. It's kind of like a rock climber, securing themselves to the rock face before they start climbing.
Oh, I see. And how do they actually extract the materials once they're anchored?
There are a few different methods. Some companies are developing special drills that are designed to work in low gravity. That way, they don't mess up the asteroid's structure too much. Others are using heat or chemicals to loosen the materials and then extract them.
Right. And didn't Transasteroid come up with that optical mining thing? Using sunlight to vaporize the asteroid? That one blew my mind.
Optical mining is pretty wild. They're essentially using huge mirrors to concentrate sunlight onto a specific spot on the asteroid. It gets so hot that the surface vaporizes, and that releases all these valuable gases and minerals.
So they're like using the sun as a giant mining laser.
Pretty much. But then the question is, what do you do with all those vaporized materials? You don't want them just floating
You
away.
got to catch them somehow.
Exactly. So they've developed these special chambers and collectors to capture all that stuff, kind of like giant vacuum cleaners in space.
They're vacuuming up asteroids.
You got it.
Yeah.
And then those 3D printers we talked about earlier, those come in handy big time. They can use the materials they've just mined to create new parts, tools, even whole structures right there on the asteroid.
So we mine it, they process it, and then they build with it, all in one place. That's amazing. But okay, I got to ask, all of this sounds pretty intense. What about the environmental impact?
It's a valid question. We can't just go around strip mining asteroids without thinking about the consequences. But the good news is a lot of these companies are super focused on sustainability.
That's good to hear.
They're trying to minimize the disruption they cause, manage waste responsibly, and basically be good stewards of the space environment.
That's awesome. It's like they're not just thinking about profits, they're thinking about the long-term health of the solar system.
Exactly. It's a whole new way of thinking about things. But there's another layer to this whole thing, too. The legal and ethical side.
Right, like who owns the resources on an asteroid? Are there space laws?
It's kind of a gray area, to be honest. The international treaties that govern space, those were written before anyone even thought about asteroid mining.
So, basically, we need new space laws.
Pretty much. There are already people working on that, though, trying to create a clear framework for space resource utilization, figuring out things like ownership, liability, environmental protection, making sure everything is done right.
It sounds like there's still a lot to figure out.
Oh, yeah, but that's what makes it so exciting.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty inspired after this deep dive.
Me too. It's incredible to see what humans can achieve when they set their minds to something.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the technical challenges to the economic potential, and even the ethical dilemmas.
It's a whole new world out there, and we're
Yeah.
just starting to explore it.
I hope our listeners are feeling that same sense of wonder and possibility. Who knows, maybe some of you listening will be the ones to make this asteroid mining dream a reality. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.